Chapter 36. Despite your interest, you decide to leave the war between the Ironborn and the Starks alone for now, and refocus your mind on the Reach, which despite devastating raids on the Ironborn's part is yet to break. All in all, it was rather unsurprising with how many differences people are willing to overlook when it serves the goal of destroying a common enemy. And doubtlessly the militant houses of the Reach are by now fully under the illusion that the Tyrells will finally begin ruling like proper lords, instead of just profiting off the land like common merchants. An illusion crafted with skill and charisma, but still nothing but that, a rather simple and honestly shallow illusion, as everyone that looks in from the outside could tell, but that's sadly how the world works, at least until you manage to change it. And you think you already have a decent idea how to acquire at least a small part of the Reach in the future. For the Tyrells were one of the houses that didn't send the crown troops during the Cold War, and are the only neighbors of the Westerlands that actually have land to spare, so the king would undeniably love the idea of drawing out the hosts of the West from their mountains to ensure your father's long-term loyalty and weakening at the expense of House Tyrell. You certainly would. And what lord would ever refuse the privilege to defend the lands of his liege against raiders and rebel scum numbering in the tens of thousands? Certainly not a lord that hopes to add to the legacy of his house, like a certain lion that the king knows all too well. Getting such a thought into the king's mind would be truly wonderful, an official mandate to take land from the Tyrells and defend it from people your father would put to the sword anyway, all in an effort to weaken the armies of the West. And selling the idea as overstretching your father's troops is just mad enough that the lunatic might one day actually fall for such a plan, thinking himself a genius all the while. But sadly that wouldn't be nearly as fast as the invasion you had seemingly wished for alone, but that's fine, for the realm is already in chaos, and chaos always spreads further than anyone at the time could have imagined. Thus buying some whisperers and waiting for a decade seems overall fine to you. It's after all not like you're the only one knowing the truth about humanity, and the wolves and opportunists of the realm won't squander the chance you gave them, that much is sure. If only you could say the same about the lions of this world, everything would be nigh perfect, but you feel like they're simply too impassive to seize the opportunity going by your family and your vassals. But you can deal with that, seeing as you aren't under all that much time pressure with half of your potential enemies wasting their time and resources on each other. And it's not like you plan to stop your work by relying on a plan that would take a decade to finish, just because your house isn't too fond of risking its troops before every bit of strength is drawn up. No, you still had some ideas that could be used right away, like your current favorite of buying up and selling your fishing boats to the Iron Islands, an idea you had since the first wave of raids hit the unprotected coasts of the Reach. For it was such a grand and helpful revelation that you just couldn't leave the knowledge unused for any longer, considering the situation of the Ironborn. Especially with how their problems could be solved by, again, something as cheap as fishing boats, which your guild can buy in the hundreds without a problem. You're rather excited to find out if it would be enough to give the Ironborn a real chance to hold the sea, and you guess helping them out in such a way would simultaneously cheapen the price of an alliance later on as well, all at the expense of the royal fleet. And so after getting permission, just to make sure that you aren't squandering assets your father had unspoken plans for, you began the buying process for the Ironborn's newest fishing fleet, though you can only guess at how many ships will actually be freed up for the war. Surely a few dozen of the proper Ironborn ships should be in it though. And considering how much the freed up ships would help in keeping up the pressure on the crown despite whatever losses they might suffer over the years, you're sure the king's health and state of mind won't improve, and will remain in the usual condition that your family will continue to happily exploit. You're more than sure of this, simply because you have met far greater men that were broken under pressure like this, without starting out as a madman in your last life. Though despite the expended gold, you still don't plan to help the Greyjoys in their struggle openly, for each problem they cause alone will be twice as effective in weakening the royal faction than it would be if House Lannister was openly supporting them. And hey, if the Ironborn retained the ability of conducting their little raids while the Westerlands secretly continued to grow in strength through your little efforts, as the king is focused on reinforcing his fleets, you wouldn't really call that helping the Ironborn, but rather call it supplying them to help your family, which you can't see your father having a problem with. If only the Ironborn had a better culture, and were as good at waging war as they were in raiding unsuspecting villages, the Rock would fully support their efforts without so much as a question. But with their lacking strength on land and the whole slave problem, they aren't worth investing anything of actual value into them, and a house like yours doesn't get to rule the Westerlands for as long as it did by being seen supporting a people of slavers, and if one thinks about it, heretics. No, until their allegiance is as cheap as their morals, you can't see your father moving so much as a finger on their behalf, even if it's ultimately a waste. He still has the pride of a lion after all. Chapter 37. You think about your father a bit more, and then decide you had to re-evaluate just how heavily the armies of the Rock would have to lift in the coming years. For the strength your house could draw upon was currently a bit too isolated, if that made sense, as in neither the fleets nor the armies were any good when it came to working together, and that's without mentioning your little brothers and sisters. Though you honestly didn't think that they could actually be beaten, you did fear that if all three came under pressure the results would be too costly to continue the conflict, for 2 out of 3 parts of your military still had the matter of moral to worry about. And sadly, said moral can't be bought with neither gold nor silver, so when formations of let's say 7 different houses break they wouldn't do so orderly. Meaning they would quickly end up multiplying any damage the enemy had actually inflicted, and you thought that there's little point in paying for the best equipment if it's then just abandoned on the battlefield, especially with how neither side was all that limited by manpower. You needed more than loyalty for a war like your father had seemingly envisioned, you needed unity. So you quickly decide you would have to take some time to properly learn how to propagate a greater unity of the Westerlands, hence you make your way to your father's chamber to get his help, for even getting him to realize the existence of the problem would help your efforts a lot. Not to mention that he's the perfect person to help you out with your newest work, seeing as a leader of his standing has to know his own reputation and paroles quite well if he hoped to use them like he did. Meaning, he clearly knows more about at least the basics of stuff like this than you, so you naturally plan to use his experiences for everything they're worth. Can I take up some of your time, father? I would like to practice a speech I thought of for the troops and the small folk, and old man Gisbert said you had a few hours. Gisbert isn't wrong, but make it quick, as army. And make sure to explain yourself before you begin. As you wish, father, thank you. I thought about the future a little and came to realize that beyond their equipment, our men aren't anything special. Continue. Yes, I thought that perhaps we could use that absence of anything special to unite them into a single massive entity of steel, an army so plain and loyal that it could be made into the iron gauntlet of the Westerlands. So you thought that if you couldn't unite this many sources of manpower into a single working army, you what, make them fanatics? In a way, yes. Fine, give me that speech of yours then, little lion. You honestly hadn't thought about the actual wording of your speech all that much, of course beyond the greater points, but practice is there to improve and grow, which seeing as giving speeches was never a strength of yours would clearly apply. So you began practicing before your rather bemused father, but sadly it seemed that children just weren't made to give speeches, so the hours passed by, until finally despite your looks you managed to put together a speech you could pull off, or in other words, everyone else that's actually an adult should have no problems pulling of a similar one. When I look at the future I see no light, and no salvation for our situation, but I dream of it, and to my great delight I can tell you we have the chance to change that future today. For the tides of war are upon us, and never have the deeds of men and women carried further than in times of war, where each part counts and can change everything. But if a golden future for you and those that come after you is indeed what you desire, you will have to do more than you feel comfortable with, for sitting by and hoping for a brighter future won't do, and human lives will become all but worthless in the coming years. Now you might wonder what is required for a better future, especially seeing as not everyone can take up the sword to fight for it. And the answer is everything, for that is what our enemies will give when push comes to shove. But what do our enemies matter when there's work yet to do, I ask of you? What we need to achieve everything we dream of is everything we have now, and what a bargain price that is if you start to think about it. Yet there's more, another truth often overlooked and forgotten, namely that humans complement each other and are stronger together. Do not think about working together as a few hundreds, and not as a few thousands either, but as millions, for only our nation as a whole working together can truly be considered as giving everything. Thus I implore you, embrace your lords and your fellow man, for they decide your fate just as much as any god. And believe in the nation and your leaders, as they are the ones holding the key to a future of plenty for the realm. With their guidance and everyone's faith we will lift the Westerlands to the top of the world, beam by beam, and stone by stone. Under the absolute rule of House Lannister, as in the days of old, our walls will be stronger, our granaries fuller, and our homes warmer. For the Lords of the Rock, as in ages past, truly cared for the people they ruled, while the crown under the Targaryens only cared about the East. But remember the bleakness of your existence, before you decide what the future should hold for you and your loved ones. Should others have to follow your struggles, or will you join the call for the great and united push towards a golden future under the Lion? Push on for the good of our families. Push on for the banner of the Lion. And push on for the future of the Westerlands. Chapter 38. You felt like the speech was decent enough for its purpose, and so commanded Darlan to write it down after you returned from your father's chamber, though how your time together ended still occupied your mind. It was after all outright unthinkable for someone to just slam the door open and drag your father away, but then you also didn't think you would see your mother utterly overcome with fury in the doorway, so the whole thing being unthinkable simply passed by your mind unchecked. Being still a bit overwhelmed, you decide to focus on the matter of the speech instead. You had originally planned to leave the making of copies to Darlan, but then simply joined him in writing the remaining 25 copies. You planned to give them to the high nobles of the core faction, for neither you nor your father would enjoy the work needed to spread the needed unity. The Lord of the Rock would have to stand above giving silly little speeches in the future anyway, especially seeing as it would just make it harder to repeat or change the message for new situations once an official version is given. Or so you thought before you gave your work over to the heads of the core faction. You reasoned that the heads of the 70 most trusted houses working as one would have little in the way of problems when it came to turning your speech into more than a simple collection of words. A sentiment of unity was what you and your father wanted to gain from it, and so your father's men made sure that a sentiment of unity was what you got from it. Though as it turns out there were quite a few problems with your little plan. For one, density, as in everyone of importance in the Westerlands was currently in the Rock. And secondly, as even the most powerful houses subservient to the Lion of the West were already somewhat gobsmacked before you made unity your focus, so they needed all in all very little in the way of convincing to become part of the Loyalists. You had forgotten that most houses were quite puny, so after seeing the new Lannisport, which by now might actually be the most prosperous city on the continent, and looking upon the armies of the Rock, your little push turned a faction of a mere 70 overall weak houses into one of hundreds in a matter of days, all by unthinkingly showing them some sweet dessert and a blade that's currently searching for things to cut. You quite like the analogy, but it's bothersome that forgetting things has become the norm in your day-to-day life. You wouldn't have sent 70 houses of near fanatics out to add to their kind if you had remembered just how vulnerable the minds of humans would be in the current situation. But thanks to your failing mind, you're now stuck with the fanatics that you wanted years before you had anything to do for them, and having bored fanatics all around your lands really isn't what you had planned. You're sure that they will begin brewing up all kinds of trouble once no one is looking anymore, and when they settle down with their new mindset no one will want to fall behind in the struggle for the promised future. It would most likely become a matter of pride, and the Lords of the Westerlands never lacked pride. Your dream of all the cute little lions falling in line as one became more and more unlikely the longer you thought about it, for no overachiever could truly be trusted to stay behind or hold the line. It's quite frustrating that you will have to change your plans again, but people blinded by the future will still make for decent assets, you supposed after a few more minutes of thought. So with everything sorted out for the moment you return your focus back to the present, or now the past you guess, and you can't help but wonder why your family felt so different now. Your mother has returned to her usual self, but now your father is the one emanating fury, but his fury is far more composed and restrained, so that only his movements give anything away. You didn't hear anything, neither through your statues nor the servants, so it was probably a matter from outside the Rock. But why would your mother be the one to hear of the issue first if it's such a big deal? You would of course ask your father, except you weren't quite that dense, but then you weren't sure if you could ask your mother about it either, seeing as you could feel the vibrations coming off of her whenever you got close. It was a rather weird situation to be in for someone like you. Your mother clearly knew you had questions, but was just as clearly opposed to having a conversation about it, even shaking whenever you got close. So you decided to save the questions for your father once he calms down, whenever that will be, and asked instead why she didn't have her lion with her. You got a relieved smile from her, though that turned troubled a second later. It seems the two matters aren't completely unconnected. I wished to speak with your father alone, Azami. So what did you talk about? Nothing you need to know about, little lion. In fact, that was the whole point, Azami. Fine, but you will take your lion with you again, right? I do worry if I don't know where you are. It's bad enough that Cersei and Jaime lose their lions literally every day. Every day, you say? Yes, every day, so can I call it here? Later, Azami, I still need to talk to your father. Whatever the problem was, it's been days. What's there more to talk about, mother? Just focus on whatever you find interesting and the matter will be dealt with before you know it. You know your father, now move along, Azami. I'm gone as soon as you tell me when I can send the little one your way again. That's not too much to ask, is it? If it helps you, I will go from your father's chambers directly to yours when I am done, but now stop being so stubborn and move along, little lion. Chapter 39. You were sadly unable to piece together the answers you sought from your little conversation, but you felt like it wouldn't really matter, seeing as your parents were already working on it. You were however quite unsatisfied with how focused they were on fixing their secret little problem, for they were leaving half of their duties undone to the side. Which obviously increased the time you had to invest into your own projects as well, though it's mostly your fault. It's still annoying. Your idea of selling the riches of the rock might have done all kinds of wonders to Lannisport, but replacing it all was a logistics struggle that required the attention of both of your parents. And of course the purchases were going through your guild, meaning you quickly got the job to make sure no one would tempt their luck with all the priceless goods standing around the docks. Which of course included the countless vassals of your family, who naturally weren't all too pleased about the show of open mistrust. Logically speaking, it was obvious that you would sooner or later get work you didn't like thrown your way after you spent years nurturing the trust of your parents. It was after all a great and safe way of testing how you would fare if work you had no interest in was entrusted to you, for what man would nurture a genuine grudge against a little girl doing as she was told by her parents? Yeah, you could see the logic of entrusting this job to you, though that hardly made the reading of report after report any more fun. So rather than going about it like your parents did, you just threw the stuff into the nearest chambers and created a few statues to guard them, before anyone began their work in the third week of your appointment. And so you efficiently restored your ability to do things you liked while the sun was still up, at least for a time, but you guessed it wouldn't be too much of a problem with how your parents weren't focused on the matter anyway, so you decided you would take some time to see the fruits of your labor yourself. Lannisport was quite lovely to behold, the many colors of autumn mixing with the white of the houses beautifully, and that all with the refreshing temperatures expected of a light winter. You actually found out that this would normally be it: no snow, no death, no nothing, just a bit of cold air, and that would really be it for the full 8 years of winter, this far in the south. In a way, your new home is just weird like that, having 4 greater seasons of 8 years which then also appear each year with varying intensity. These rules apply for each season except of course for the winter, for when the proper winter strikes the continent it's entirely up to Lady Luck if one will see anything but snow in its first couple of years. Which no one seems to put to the question anymore, but you honestly can't blame them, seeing as you also don't understand what's truly going on. The gods just seem to have their way with the world, meaning the logic of mortals isn't really applicable anymore, for no one, you included, even knows if the god of fire, for example, cares anything about anyone interfering with the summer. Thinking about it, most people would know even less than you about these matters, and that despite them having lived decades in this world controlled by the gods, it wouldn't come up in the day-to-day life after all. And truth be told, you also wouldn't care if it wouldn't affect you as it does, though you do wonder what the mild winter will do to the faith in your lands, or more precisely, you're curious if your family could make use of the changes. Now that everything is as perfect as it could possibly be made, the people would surely have some time and gold to spare for the gods, and who knows, perhaps the creation of more followers could actually gain you the favor of the gods. Well, one can always dream. You guess it is as good a time as any to poke the gods and see what happens, so you send a little message through your lions to let your parents know where you will be for the coming week, and of course where you stood with your duties. It would take quite some time for the next shipment to come, seeing as the Ironborn activity meant that the ships needed to secure the next convoy were, let's call it, occupied. Now officially free, you found yourself praying to the Seven, reciting each prayer you learned throughout the years in what by now most likely counted as their main temple on the western side of the continent, and your list of prayers was all things considered surprisingly extensive. You never were a woman of God, or gods for that matter, but you also never had anything against belief in a higher power either, which, seeing as you liked to study cultures before you conquered them, meant you were quite proficient in appealing to them, not that you ever used it for anything. Luckily, most of these prayers were easily changed to fit the faith of your family and the realm at large, meaning you had more than enough material to annoy the gods for a bit. They couldn't really be any worse than the one who already introduced himself so very skillfully, or at least you hoped they wouldn't have any elementals to annoy you back. Being as kind as you were, you decided to ask for something straightforward, namely the good health and fortune of your family, so truly something simple and understandable. So with your mind made up about what you were actually praying for the last few hours, the week passed by with nothing but prayers and water, until you, perhaps an hour before you planned to return to the rock, noticed the little girl beside you. Thinking back on the moment she first joined you, you realized the gods were already fed up with you before you even decided on what you were actually praying for, most likely having trouble ignoring prayers coming from another world. Yeah, you totally won't abuse that in the future. Chapter 40. You caught my interest, girl. What's your name? I'm called Marie, my lady. So the gods really sent me a little commoner girl as help? Well, whatever. Tell me, Marie, what do the gods want from me on this lovely day? Pardon? Now, do you really want to play dumb with me? Lying in the house of the gods is actually quite sinful, Marie. Shouldn't a sister of the faith, even a little one, be wiser than that? It seems like your newest companion isn't all that bright, but if it means you can finally figure out what the seven actually want from you, you're more than happy to show a bit more kindness to the girl. For all you knew, this was simply what happened to the mind of a human when a god decides to interact with it, and seeing as the girl was little more than a messenger, you could hardly be annoyed with her. Though, it was still quite frustrating that she genuinely thought she could hide her connection to the gods from you, like you were a normal person. There was no way that the gods left her in the dark about her future role, meaning the girl was most likely crushed by fear to still have such a reaction despite knowing better. You of course needed only a few moments to open her up again after she became so cutely defensive about her knowledge. Pointing out a way of improvement to the little fanatic worked wonders in that aspect. Perhaps the gods had chosen the girl in front of you to do more than just repeat their wishes. Mayhaps they even thought that she could turn you into a better and more devout person or some such madness. And seeing how strongly her innocence is literally permeating your surroundings, it really didn't feel like your thoughts on the matter were landing all that far from the truth. You decided, after observing what you would call a mini prayer of apology, that you would take your little oracle back with you to the rock, for you were sure that she would do as the gods commanded her soon enough. You had waited years to properly explore your home, and you waited even longer to do so freely and without pain. You could wait a bit longer for the gods to reveal the future. It might even be better that way, seeing as they were most likely a bit annoyed with you after you poked them for a week. So, what do you think of my home, Marie? It's big. That's not wrong, I guess, though I expected a little more enthusiasm. It's your home now as well, you know. You really can stop being so fearful now. It's not like I will bite your head off, Marie. It's a bit annoying. Yes, my lady. No honorifics either. I know that you know my name. You can be yourself while only my knights are around. In fact, I order you to be yourself. That's mean, my lady. No, that's mean, Azami. It's not that hard, Marie. Ugh, you know that just because you know a few things about me that I won't be mad, right? You knew? Sigh, of course I know, and just so you finally get it, I wouldn't invite someone I didn't trust into my home, nor my retinue. You, Marie, were chosen by the seven to assist me in my mission, of that I'm sure, or in clearer words, I'm willing to make the first step when it comes to trusting you, as long as I believe you're acting in good faith. It seems like you will really have to send someone over to check on your newest companion. No one can be that slow. She still isn't trusting you. What more can you possibly do to make her happy? Marie really wasn't living up to your expectations here. You could feel that even your knights were more at ease around her, and you were able to see that she wasn't unsatisfied with the situation, while still remaining so annoyingly quiet. Thinking back on the week, she was also quiet while you prayed, but her little outbursts told you clearly that she was a sociable person at heart. Say, Marie, is it my fault that you're so uncomfortable? You are a bit insistent, Azami. And I can't really see you. Like when you talked to me the first time, I was sure we were supposed to meet one another much earlier. That does sound a bit off-putting, but I can't really do anything against that, you know. The past is the past, and it's not like a week makes much of a difference anyway. Can't we just be friends? It feels like the gods would approve, and I would have use for someone with your amount of charisma, Marie. You're not right, Azami. I don't know why, because the gods didn't show me, but you're feeling really corrupted. Well, at least you're finally being honest. But I truly don't believe that I could change that for you, Marie. I am who I am. But that doesn't mean you have to be fearful all the time. You're already in the lion's den, if you will, and you haven't come to any harm, at least that I know of. Not all of my father's vassals will like you. Okay, but why not? You told me I'm charismatic or something like that, didn't you? In the sense that the seven are blessing you, yes, but even normal nobles would want to serve me, meaning a commoner will have it rough. That's not fair at all. It's not fair that the gods are helping you either, but I can't hear you lamenting that matter, Marie. Yeah, fine, I still don't need that lesson from someone that had everything from birth, and then some, Azami. You needed to be reminded, Marie. I'm simply the one that did it. You won't complain about your life? Why would I? I have, or at least will have, everything that I could possibly want. There's no reason to complain about the few struggles I come across, if others face much worse for much less. Huh, you still feel corrupted, Azami? Sigh, do you want to play with my lion?